What's going on, backpackers and campers? My name is Dave, and this is Off Grid. I'm into backpacking, hiking, camping, and gear. If you like those things too, think about subscribing to the channel down below. It would really help me out and help the channel out, so I greatly appreciate it. Today's side-by-side comparison is going to be comparing an alcohol stove versus a gas can stove. So today we're going to be doing a rundown, a head-to-head matchup. We're going to be getting into stuff like the specs, the price points. I'm going to give you my final thoughts in different categories and all that good stuff. So let's just get started. Let's get into the overall look and design of the two different types of systems. The first one that I have here for you guys that I'm going to show you is going to be the gas canister system. So this has this is an example of a 100-gram gas canister. And then we also have something that not a ton of people use, but this is a gas canister stand. It has these legs that fold out and they clip to the bottom of the stove like so, and it just gives it more of a firm footing for your gas can so that it doesn't tip over and burn the whole forest down. We don't want that to happen. Then lastly, you got here your stove. This is a cheap Chinese knockoff. This is the E-Tech City stove that was super popular that I can't seem to find online anymore, but tons of different people end up making this one. I got this one super cheap, and it has a super simple design. The feet just kind of swing out, and you make sure that the valve is closed, and then you just screw it on top of your stove like so. Super easy, super quick setup, and then you just put your pot right on top and light it and go. The second setup here we have is the alcohol stove system. So that one there was 3 main pieces, and then this one here is going to be 4. I've got my fuel in my bottle right here. So I primarily used denatured alcohol. I'll show you that in a little bit. But this is just a cheap plastic bottle with a little pop top that I have here that makes it super easy to dish out your alcohol into your alcohol stove. I also have my windscreen here. This one is by Vargo. Super lightweight. It is made out of a lightweight aluminum. And can take many different shapes. You got kind of like a hexagonal shape right there. My stove and my pot is a little bit thinner, so I like to put it into more of a diamond type shape like that. But this acts kind of twofold too. It is not only a pot holder, but it is also a windscreen. So you put it on top with the stove underneath, and blocks the wind, but it also keeps it up off of your stove, your burner. So the main burner that I have here is also the Toaks titanium burner, and I say also because this is the Toaks titanium pot. This is 750 milliliter Toaks titanium pot. And then I've got the Toaks titanium burner. And then as one added piece, this is the 4th piece to the system here, and that is the little cork coaster that I ended up getting. I think these were like 4 for $2 or something. It's super thin. It's just 1/8 of an inch of a coaster that I use as a heat buffer so that I can kind of make sure that it doesn't get too hot on whatever I'm cooking on. So you put the coaster down, you put your burner down, you put your fuel into your stove, and then you get the windscreen around it like so, and then you light it, and then once everything is lit, you got your water in your pot, you just put it on and let it go. So that system is super easy as well. A couple more pieces, a little bit more to it, but for the most part, still pretty easy to rock and roll with that system. Another caveat that I'll mention today is that I'm specifically speaking towards just boiling water and not doing anything more intricate. So this is going to be a head-to-head test of boiling 2 cups of water, roughly half of a liter of water. So let's get into the overall time that it took for each of these systems to boil. I'm going to go through each one of them by themselves. I'll get into the overall time as well as the price perspective of one system, and then I'll move into the other one. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the alcohol stove system that you just saw. And for me, I'm going to throw in some B-roll here too for you guys. It took me roughly 7 minutes, maybe a little bit under, but on my watch, a rolling boil came about at about the 7-minute mark. The overall price point on this one now, so the fuel is a little bit different for each one of these systems. So for an alcohol stove, you have to get one of these, or there's a few other types of fuel that you can use. This one is by Crown, and it is for, just says alcohol stove fuel, but it is basically denatured alcohol. I got this over at REI, and it is a 32-ounce bottle. Ended up getting for about $8. I found out that 1 ounce of alcohol in my Toaks stove or burner wound up burning for about 11 minutes. So a quarter of that time, if you were to do the math, is roughly 8 minutes and 15 seconds. So technically I only need about 3/4 of an ounce of denatured alcohol to boil my 2 cups of water in my Toaks titanium pot. That means that I can get roughly about 42 boils out of that 32-ounce container. So if I was using an ounce every single time to boil my water out of a 32-ounce can, I would get 32 boils, but since I'm using 3/4 of an ounce, I'm going to end up getting about 42 boils out of the container. So doing a little bit more math, if you do $8, which is the price of the container, divided by the number of boils that I can get out of the can, which is roughly 42, then that brings it to about 19 cents per boil. Now, this is under optimal conditions. I ran my test inside. It is, obviously the best conditions that you can get. There's no wind, there's no extreme cold. You're talking about a temperate environment that you can control, so it was a lot easier for me to control that environment. So obviously outside factors can be a variable in either one of these stove systems, so that's something that you definitely have to keep in mind. Now let's head over to the gas stove now. The total time in my test that I took, again, I'm taking 2 cups of water and bringing it to a boil. Total time on that stove wound up being 3 minutes and 26 seconds to boil the same amount of water. So a 100-gram canister gets around 8 boils to it. So what I'm going to do here and how I came to that number, to give you a little bit more of an explanation, I'm going to link up in the cards REI's video on they did a similar test where there's some outside factors here, some differing factors, but I basically used their math in order to calculate how many boils I would be able to get out of my container, because I didn't feel like burning through an entire canister for the purposes of this video. But it's definitely a great video. Head on over and check it out. But in their video, they were using an MSR stove, and they were using a gas canister system, and they found out that they were, I think it was about 2 minutes and 12 seconds to get to a boil. They did the math and found out that it was about 12.5 boils per 100-gram canister. So I basically reverse engineered that based off of the time that it took me in my environment, which is also inside. The video that they did was inside. I reverse engineered the time and basically found out that based off of the time it took me to get the same 2 cups of water to a boil, I found out that I would get about 8 boils out of this canister. So again, doing the math on that, the canister normally goes for around $5 on REI's website in my neck of the woods where I live. So I think that's a pretty decent price to expect across the board. So you take $5, you divide it by roughly 8 boils that I'm able to get off of this stove, and you come to about 63 cents per boil with the gas canister stove. So now onto my final thoughts and the side-by-side comparison. I'm going to break it down into a few different categories here, but let's just go one at a time. From a total price perspective, the cost of the alcohol fuel is always going to be cheaper. In this example, it is about 2/3 cheaper. Remember, for the alcohol burn test, it was costing me about 19 cents to bring 2 cups to a boil, and for the gas canister stove, it was about 63 cents. So that is roughly 2/3 cheaper than your gas canister stove. So the point for that category is definitely going to go over to the alcohol stove system. For the time perspective, a different category here, gas stoves are always going to be faster. In this example, the gas canister stove took about half of the time to boil my 2 cups as the alcohol stove system did. Remember, the alcohol stove system took about 7 minutes to boil, and the gas canister stove took a little bit under 3.5 minutes. So that is right on point for being half the amount of time. So the point for who is the quickest is going to go over to the gas canister stove. The next category here, or 1-to-1 so far, so keeping it close, is going to be the overall weight in your pack. Now, when I thought about this category, I was thinking about it from a perspective of your total weight. Now, fuel in general is going to be considered not part of your base weight because it is considered a consumable, which basically means as you use it, the weight decreases, so you don't add it to your overall base weight in your pack. However, for this example, I'm going to use it towards your total weight. So I was going head to head with the total weight of each system. So for the gas canister stove with all three of these pieces included, on my scale it weighs 11.4 ounces if you weigh the stove, the gas can, and the stand that I have in that system. Now, you have different styles of stoves. Different stoves are a little bit lighter than others. The gas can, as far as 100 gram or 110 grams for this particular gas can, is always going to be roughly the same as the smallest can that you can buy for this type of system. And the stand, if you were to use one, is always going to be roughly the same too. It is a lightweight plastic. It's only about an ounce. So not a ton of variables there except for the stove. And obviously the E-Tech City stove, this has a piezo ignition, so it's a little bit heavier in the materials and the construction. One of the most popular ones is the BRS stove right now, and that only weighs about an ounce. So just keep that in mind. This one weighs about 3 ounces, so the BRS cuts down a couple of those ounces there if you were to go with that type of stove. But for this system, it is 11.4 ounces on my scale. Heading over to the alcohol stove and system here, and obviously the thing that is the same in both of them is going to be the pot here, so I'm not including that in the overall weight. But if we factor in the windscreen here, the fuel bottle with the fuel, the burner or the stove for the alcohol stove, as well as the tiny little coaster here, which weighs next to nothing. On my scale, all of this combined weighs 6.25 ounces. Again, different variables. You can make your own stove. You didn't have to buy one like I did with this stove. You can make it out of a soda can, but I'm a klutz and I would probably end up cutting myself if I tried to fashion one of those for myself. So I decided not to go with that. But for the weight, this is super lightweight anyway, so this is one of the lightest systems that you can kind of use for your alcohol stove system. So all that together is 6.25 ounces. So if you did the quick math on that one, 11.4 minus 6.25 is going to get you to 5.15 ounces of total savings in your pack. That is actually a pretty decent number. You're talking about a little under half a pound there in total weight savings. So obviously the point on this particular category is going to go over to your alcohol stove system. And the next category that we're going to get into is going to be, in my opinion, it's a huge pro for the alcohol stove over the gas stove, and that is going to be being able to control the amount of fuel that you use in your stove system. So with a gas can, you're always going to have, especially when you buy it new, it's going to be completely full. And a completely full gas can, depending on which trip you go on, could be overkill in the majority of situations. And trying to transfer that fuel into something else, they have different attachments that you can use to transfer fuel from one to the other, but I personally wouldn't recommend it, and I don't really see that as a common practice, so I can't personally vouch for that. So to me, you're doing a lot more guesswork unless you're kind of putting it on your kitchen scale and weighing it after every single trip to kind of figure out how much fuel you have left and how many boils you have left. With an alcohol stove system, it's super easy. You just take this big can here, you get a funnel, and you put it into this little bottle here. This is a 4-ounce bottle, and I know exactly how much this 4 ounces of fuel is going to get me. And also, too, if I'm going on a longer trips, I can just bring another bottle. I bought like a 3-pack of it, and you always know how much you have and like how much that alcohol is going to last you when you're out in the backcountry. So that, to me, like ease of mind of knowing how to plan for a trip and how much fuel you actually need, definitely is a point over to the alcohol stove system versus the gas stove system or the gas can stove system. So the count so far, I think, is tipping the scales towards the alcohol stove system. But the last category that I have here is going to be ease of use. And I think no doubt one of the easiest systems that you can use is going to be the gas stove system. It is super user friendly and super easy. You literally just screw it on top of the valve. You open up this little gauge right here. If you have a piezo, you can click the little igniter here. And if you don't, you just have, you know, a mini Bic, which I always carry as a backup anyway, and you ignite the stove. With an alcohol stove system, you have to be super careful when you're out there. It's really easy to knock it over. You're putting your alcohol into basically just this small little bowl right here. So you have to be super careful about like how you put your windscreen over it, how you end up putting your pot on it, and really making sure that you're super careful with it and you don't knock it over and cause a fire. So the ease of use, while you can still tip over your gas canister stove and cause a fire as well, there's just more moving parts. You have to pour in your fuel into the alcohol stove system, and it just makes it easier to create an accident, I guess I would say. So the ease of use point is definitely going to go over to the gas canister stove, and for another reason as well is because of this little gauge right here that ends up regulating the height of your flame. So again, today I was mostly just talking about it from a perspective of only boiling water, but if you did want to create more intricate meals when you're out in the backcountry, I would definitely recommend a gas canister stove over an alcohol stove. And that's mostly, again, because you can regulate the temperature that much more easily. It's not to say that you can't do it with an alcohol stove system, but you have to be able to find one that has these simmer rings. I'll see if I can post a picture somewhere up here of a simmer ring that basically is just this ring that has a little flap that kind of goes over, and that basically like cuts off the diameter of the lid to kind of regulate the height of the flame. But it's a lot more clunky. You have to take it off and kind of move it around in order to try to get it to work just right. And again, you know, these smaller stoves here, I mean, I think I put an ounce of alcohol in this Toast stove here, and it wound up getting pretty close to the top, maybe like 2/3 of the way full, and that was only an ounce. And an ounce, like I said, only lasts about 11 minutes. So the other challenge with this would be, you know, if you're cooking a little bit longer and you're trying to cook more intricate meals, you probably have to stop and let the flame, you know, kind of go out, add more fuel, let it kind of cool down a little bit, and then, you know, light it up again to continue cooking. So the breaks and the pauses in between there definitely kind of messes with your flow a little bit. So the point on the ease of use is definitely going to head on over to the gas canister stove camp. So if you're keeping track, that's 5 different categories right there. The ultimate winner for today is going to be the alcohol stove system. Now again, this is just for boiling a couple of cups of water in there. And you know, my preferred system, if you were to ask me personally of which one that I would go with, again, it really depends on the type of trip that I'm going on. If I'm going on a car camping trip where I just kind of want like ease of use and I'm probably going to be cooking more intricate meals, then I'm definitely going to take more of a gas canister style of stove. But if I'm headed to the backcountry and all I really want to do is spend a weekend out there and I'm just, you know, rehydrating some dehydrated meals and I really only need to boil water, then I'm definitely going to prefer using the alcohol stove system. And that is mostly because of everything that I laid out today. It is going to be lighter, it is going to be cheaper to use, and even though it takes about double the amount of time to boil your water, I'm not ever usually in that huge of a rush where those few extra minutes really matter that much. So, you know, there's pros and cons to each one of these systems. It really depends on which one you would prefer. A lot of people end up recommending, if you're a beginner and you're going out there just starting out, going with the gas canister stove, and that's how I started out. And then eventually I migrated over to the alcohol stove system. But personally, you know, I would say as long as you test it out in your home and try it out first, really like test it and figure out how to use it. Don't just go out there with either one of these systems and just try it out for the first time. Really put it through its paces and test it out. But I wouldn't necessarily say that you couldn't head out to the backcountry in one of your first trips out there and not use an alcohol stove system. The gas can is super easy, but the alcohol stove system definitely has its advantages as well. So just in the amount that you're going to save with each one of your boils, you know, saving 43 cents, or actually I think it's 44 cents, doesn't sound like it's it's that much in the short term, but it definitely adds up over time, and especially throughout the course of the year, it can definitely start to add up. So, you know, me personally, if I'm just going to be boiling water for my dehydrated meals, I'm definitely going to choose the alcohol stove system. So that's it for today's head-to-head. Let me know in the comments down below which stove system you used. If you found any useful information out of this video, I'd like to know about it. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I really appreciate you. And remember, if you're heading off grid, make sure you do your research and you make it a safe one. Until the next time, I'll see you guys later.